Please remember that nothing we say here should be taken as personal advice. The conversation is for entertainment purposes only. If you have questions about your financial situation, please talk to a licensed financial advisor. Welcome to another episode of Future Money, where we talk about the technologies of the future
that will make us money. Kyle Jackson, welcome. We have the Founder Series. Today we welcome our good friend Kyle Jackson, CEO and founder of Talespin. And the theme today is future of work. So I want you to start there. Let's talk about that. I know you've been thinking about this for a long time and many years.
Broad topic.
It's a very big topic, yeah. Hopefully we can distill it down to something that we can all fathom and understand.
And I think interestingly, Kyle was at one of the events we did a few years back speaking about the future of work. And it was pre-COVID, so I think the conversation changes since then.
Some changes and some just doubled down.
Correct. So I think it's interesting to have like the Kyle before COVID and Kyle after COVID.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because Kyle was thinking about this for many years, and I think COVID just completely changed or accelerated some of the stuff that you've been working on. So maybe we start there. Let's talk about the future of work. Where are we right now and what's happening?
Well, let's talk about Talespin first and what you guys actually do.
Yeah, so we've been now 7 years in this kind of future of work category, and it was kind of a buzzword back then, and largely undefined like the metaverse is kind of now, right? And so, but over the time, it's come to really kind of stand for a couple big macro trends, right? And so Talespin, as a company, was founded on the basis of those trends becoming realized, and so one of them was. The world is moving at a pace that we can't really keep up with a lot of our old systems, so, and when I mean systems, I mean org structures, I mean education systems, I mean the way the resume system and the employment system works. Like things are moving at a pace in which we need to kind of rethink some of those foundational systems that we're sitting in the middle of that storm now. And then when you start to take that as fact, you start to think about, well, how do we achieve those accelerated outcomes? And so you start to think about training, you start to think about education, you start to think about how do we share our skills and our abilities with each other, and that's really what Talespin was about. So we sat down and we said, this is a really big macro problem. It's something that's likely going to touch every employed person on the planet over the next decade, and we need to start to rethink those systems. And so this was happening right at the time. My background was in media entertainment and kind of bleeding edge of content workflows. So this is happening right at the time as Oculus got bought, as VR started to make a resurgence. Yeah. And the hypothesis was that maybe these new modalities, these new spatial modalities would be that acceleration and be that kind of richer data environment that could change some of these. So
it's interesting. Your background is storytellers, media, filmmaking, and so forth. And then obviously you also worked for Apple at a certain point in your life, right?
Yep.
You maybe many years ago, right?
Long time ago. 21 years ago.
Crazy, right? Fun story about Kyle. Maybe he wants to tell, maybe he's not, but he took his Apple stock and made a movie with it.
Yeah, that was a dumb decision. I didn't know Hatem then.
Yeah, exactly.
That wasn't on your advice.
Well, hopefully Talespin will work out really well for you. But the intersection of media making and obviously being in technology, how does that work into this kind of new modality that you're working with?
So any new medium, right? So if you think of digital video back when I was at Apple, that was coming online as a new medium. We had physical distribution of 35 millimeter prints in the cinema, and we had VHS as a physical medium again. So digital video as a medium was just starting to come online. And anytime any new medium like that comes online, I mean, you have an entire set of new standards, an entire set of new workflows, an entire set of new tools, right. Everything, right? And so that's true in e-learning. That's true in web development and things like that. So, I basically spent 20 years kind of moving through those new mediums and some of those new standards. And so, as VR and AR started to become more real again, I mean, it's obviously a resurgence of a technology from decades ago.
Yeah.
Right.
It has all those problems, right? It's like there's no standardized content formats. There's no standardized distribution protocols. There's no standardized anything. And so it doesn't really matter what you need to apply it to, whether you want to apply it to learning content, educational content, sports content. There's commonality there in terms of like the underlying skills to figure this stuff out. And so while I wasn't, coming from building another ed tech startup, a lot of that background is really relevant.
Amazing. What was the aha moment? I've seen you through this journey for the last 7 years or so, and I've seen you kind of struggle with how to define this to people, right?
Big problem.
Yeah, right. You were ahead of so many people, and obviously you just raised a bunch of money, and now you have a lot of adoption and so forth. But what was the aha moment? Like, it was like, hey, this is going to be the medium that's going to take us to the next level.
So there's first the hypothesis, right? So the hypothesis is that if we were able to like more fully engage like the way that we do when we go out into just the real world in our learning activities.
Yeah.
So right now a lot of learning content, if you think about it, is passive. Like you lean back, you watch a video, you lean back, certain things. That's not how our physiology is made, right?
Sure.
We are made to be actively engaged in things, and when we do, the retention, both the speed and uptake and the retention is exponential.
Tremendous,
you remember vacations from 15 years ago, and so that's because of that physiology.
You're using all of your senses, basically.
Using everything.
Yeah.
So the hypothesis is like, well, let's first start with, we got a problem, we got a math problem, we need to learn and change more frequently and at a higher velocity than we ever have before. And two, all of our systems.
Speak about that a little bit before you move on. Speak about why do we have to change so fast, right? Because the technology is moving so fast, and I
mean, there's societal and social aspects to that, right? There's just the nature of how we're working, both decentralization of the workforce and that changing, and then there's technology,
right?
And they're all three happening on top of each other. So from a technology one, that's kind of like the easiest one to probably understand. So we see instances where, work that used to be done by sending people out into the field to perform jobs now can be done by remote.
Yep.
Now that can be drones, that can be sensors that are put in the field, that can be photos that are taken from satellites. It's just like we have a lot of ways to do things that changes the nature of work. And that's now rippling all the way through knowledge work.
Right.
So, you have things like GPT-3, which is like, it can write for you.
Sure.
So jobs that were,
What's GPT-3?
It's OpenAI is a company that was founded to basically kind of build artificial general intelligence, but in a responsible way. And their latest model, their latest commercially released model is called GPT-3. Okay. And so what it does is you can give it a prompt of text, and it literally will expand on it as if it was a conversation like this. So the computer becomes alive in a different way. So I can be writing an article, and I can literally write like the first 4 sentences of my headers and say, write the article.
Yeah.
And so that type of stuff changes.
You can try it. Yeah. It's pretty cool, actually. You can just kind of write an article, and then it just creates like a... DALL-E is one of them, right?
Yeah, they have it for images, they have it for text. Now it's coming for video.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when I talk to AI... When I talk to computer scientists, a lot of times or data scientists, they still think AI is pretty dumb compared to what people think it's going to be or think it is. I don't know anything about AI, obviously, as a layperson, but when I talk to those people, they're like, oh, well, it really can't do that many things. And people confuse AI with machine learning, with neural networks, and all these things, which are all sort of buzzwords we use to throw together. And so I think it's important for people to, number one, what are the distinctions between those things, and how do we use them?
It's probably deeper and more specific than most people even need to know.
Okay.
So I think, and this is actually an interesting question because I think it applies to the metaverse. I think it applies to other technologies where, sometimes, like in the case of AI, there's the general term, right, which was probably coined first and be popularized more first. And then it starts to get more nuanced where people actually understand that there's a difference between artificial general intelligence and machine learning, which is leveraging data to do pattern recognition in a predictive manner.
Yeah.
And so, it's a confusing field right now for just the general person to understand, like, when does it really matter to me?
Right.
And I would generally say that, like, what you're hearing from your kind of computer science and computer engineering community is true, except for if you have a practical application.
Right.
So the example you just made with DALL-E, the fact that I can type a text prompt and it will generate me a photograph that is good enough to use for a huge majority of use cases, takes an entire category of design work, photography work, and other things, and it changes it.
Yeah.
And so that's like the example where stuff comes in and like the entire field changes overnight.
Yeah.
And so you go back to the reason of like why the acceleration.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine that times, you know,
1,000.
you have 1,000 roles in your company,
Sure.
a major multinational, you have 1,000 or 2,000 roles in your company, and 40% of them are affected that way.
Yeah.
And now the just nature of the work that's being done is actually changing quickly.
Right.
And so you stack that all up,
Yeah.
and now you're like, okay, well, you know, how do I think about, you know, the talents of these people?
Yeah.
And
so
how do I move them?
So I think what's next there is like, what kind of skills do these people need to have in this changing world, right?
Well, that's one of the other big themes of the whole future of work, which is that basically the resume is a broken system. So start there, right? It's not a predictor of our success going forward.
How many resumes do we look at?
And honestly, none of them actually matter. What matters is the actual interview. What matters is the interaction with the person, really.
Because that's a better assessment of those talents than what people are able to present on a piece of paper. It's not verifiable.
It's not verifiable, for sure. That's the thing. You'll be like, oh, I did this and this and this. And you're like, cool.
Yeah. And so what's happening right now is there's another big there's another big area of technology, which is kind of the skills cloud, which is the idea that we will get away from resumes and we'll actually be able to represent our skills accurately through software. And therefore, like if Hatem was to apply to a company in 5 years, he might actually just send a proof of skill as a kind of a blockchain based proof of skill, and it's taken as fact. At that point, like it's not a resume. It's like that was earned.
It's almost like
certificates
that I have.
Like, here's the stuff you did for real.
Yeah. And I know how to do. I mean, Google now does. A lot of companies do this. Right. They kind of take a test. You don't have the college degree. Take a test, and if you pass the test, you can get hired.
That's actually the most popular content of education, or popular category of education content.
Really,
which is what they call it as it's unaccredited content that employers care.
Okay.
Because there's accredited content, right? University content.
Right.
Unaccredited content, which is just your YouTube.
Other random
right?
stuff,
Like I went and learned on YouTube. And then there's that category in between.
Stuff that basically I know I need in my company and I know you can do.
Well, yeah. And the fact that somebody validated that for me that I respect is like, okay, great. That's good enough for me.
That's awesome.
Now I'm ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, our education system is based on an industrial revolution era system.
Yeah, and think about like with the world where Google exists, where every piece of information is available to you. It's more about critical thinking. It's more about the skills are just different. Are we training for those skills?
Yeah.
And I don't think that.
And I don't think we are, honestly. I really don't. At least in a school level, I don't think we are.
No.
And I even remember, like, you know, we do accreditations at our job and things like that. I remember the last one I studied for. I have a ADHD, and so studying is difficult for me. I'm a critical thinker. That's where my mind works. And I'm like, why do I have to remember all this? I'm literally never going to it's the same argument you used when you were in high school, when your history teacher told you, you know, you got to remember, you know, the Stamp Act of whatever year it was. And you're like, why? Who needs to know what year the Stamp Act was? With Google there. And I literally said, why not just give me a bunch of problems?
And I mean,
give me the information that I need, and I will find out how to fix the problem.
Yeah. So like that, take that as an example. So if you could have a proof of skill in systems thinking, right, which is actually a thing. Like if you can quickly take a lot of input in, kind of systematize it in your brain, and then actually figure out how to operate within that system. Yeah, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be the game of golf. It's like, oh wait, I understand the rules. Okay, good, I'm good. Like that's a skill. Some people can't do that for a long time. Like they can't connect the different rules of a system. And so like if at a skill level, like that would actually be more valuable to know than did you pass that test? Yeah. To a lot of employers.
You can work on the golf course that way. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, literally.
I would love to. I don't know anything about golf. I know how they score. That's about it.
Okay. So this is awesome. It's such a big problem, right? Because we live in a world where 3% unemployment, but there is 10 million open jobs, but there's a lot of people that trying to find jobs. Like there is that skills gap that really exists. And
so I want to address that actually, because for a long time we've been hearing about how with this creative destruction, right? That technology comes in and it kills jobs and all this kind of stuff, which is ultimately true for some jobs. And then it moves it over. It's basically a displacement to something else. And for the last decade, I've been hearing how Google and cloud and all this stuff, robotics, are going to eliminate the need for any of these jobs. And now you got Elon Musk tacking on, on top of it and building robots to basically do what he describes as any menial task, which I don't know what that means really. Like
making burgers. Making burgers.
Making burgers. I mean, I assume putting together a car, and this is not a new concept, right? Like this was the concept of like Toyota in the 80s, right? Is like putting the cars together. We're in 2.0 or 3.0 or however version you want to say we're in. Are we actually losing any real jobs?
I mean, it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like
3% unemployment.
There's an interesting kind of other side of that equation, right? Which is that as the output increases because of other things coming into the productivity, like the input chain, like of be it machine learning, like that comes into the chain. Okay, well that just completely changed the level of output, but that doesn't. There's usually growth on the other side,
right?
So there's usually constraints that are like if you could get rid of those constraints, there's actually growth in their side, and therefore there's more jobs, there's more opportunities. Yeah, they're just super different,
right?
And so that's the issue is that a lot of and not everything falls in this category, but there's a lot of stuff that like once you start to remove those constraints, it's going to actually boost employment, not decrease it.
Yeah. So productivity basically is good for humanity. Getting and doing things better is just going to create other.
It's good if we keep ourselves busy.
Correct. That's
on less destructive things.
That's exactly it.
That's the thing, right? I think about it as our job. Like how many efficiencies have we inputted over the last 2 years?
Insane.
That like changes the job. It's not that we work less now. I don't go home at 2:00 because now I can do things faster. I find other things that I can do in those 4 hours.
And your business grew immensely.
Yeah, exactly. So like you're able to sort of compartmentalize better and create tasks and create systems that ultimately will boost productivity. And that means, guess what? We hired a bunch of people during that time. Even though the sort of like cost per hour that we were working is sort of going down, we actually built up the business bigger.
And I'd say that's the pattern everywhere. Like, I mean, basically apply that to, everything from a call center to a claims center for insurance to knowledge workers to, just every layer. They're finding ways to basically both elevate service, elevate the quality of the products, do more, expand the market. Like there's always room for growth, and those constraints have been hard, like really hard and fast for a long time.
Yep.
Are we going to have a skills gap? Are we going to have a point where I think because
I think we have it now,
and it's only getting bigger. And I think the problem with technology is it is inherently pro the haves and not the have-nots, right? So the haves will have more, and if you sort of read or watch any science fiction story, it's generally
Elon
like
Musk versus the rest kind of thing.
Not necessarily even just Elon Musk, but it's generally those stories are almost always based upon this dystopian future where the people who have money or who are educated are have a great life, and the people who are not are sort of like stuck at the bottom with no way out, so to speak.
Well, I think we've seen some of that already play out. Between computers and access to computers, and then mobile and access to mobile. But so you see that stratification, but you also see like massive acceleration in some of those markets in terms of new opportunity, new access. Yeah. So it's not. I don't think it's as black and white and as clear, but it is a problem. Yeah. It's definitely a problem.
So tell me about COVID. Like, what did COVID do to Talespin, to your thesis, to the hypothesis? And I want to talk a little bit about some of these really cool gadgets that we have here.
So I would say pre-COVID, so we started the company in 2015. So we were already coming on 5 years into the company at that point, and we had met with thousands of enterprise customers and had demoed the software and the type of the thesis to several thousand customers. And I would say it was still kind of in the theme park ride kind of place.
It's cool.
People were like, "That's really neat," and I could see how that had a lot of utility. But that's about where I'm going to leave it. Sure. Unless you found somebody who's just really passionate inside of the organization, and that happens. There's always those agents of change in every organization. So. Yeah. But yeah, post like the first 4 or 6 weeks of COVID were just super interesting because I just got a lot of calls where like, wow, okay, well the whole world just moved in you guys' direction. So there's this immediate click in people's brain who had exposure to this stuff prior that was like, okay, if I take out I can't get in real life together with people, I still have things I have to do.
Right.
I still have to figure out how to solve, training and other collaboration things that typically I brought people together for.
Yeah.
And they immediately saw this technology as a way to start to fix those problems.
And this technology being VR, AR headsets, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
mostly.
Yeah, mostly
Okay.
VR, AR headsets.
So I have to kind of ask the hard questions, right? There is a lot of skepticism around this. And I think the skepticism is because you have to wear something, so it's not really native to you as a human being. And obviously, we all tried them. It's fun, cool for a bit, and then you just put them away.
Yep.
What do you say to that?
It's just form factor.
Yeah.
We wear stuff every day on our faces. A lot of people between sports and just daily life.
Sure.
So it's not so much that you have to put something on. It's just that the form factor isn't really attractive yet.
Sure. So it's a matter of time of us getting there, right?
Theoretically. I mean, there's a lot of really, really hard problems, engineering problems, to get it to that form factor.
Yeah.
And that's what all these that's what these tens of billions of dollars are going into.
Yeah.
Is those types of problems.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of the spectacles.
Spectacles.
That's what they called it, right?
I think
that was a different kind of experience.
Yeah, the Google Glass or any other version. But
listen, you brought us these are the Oculus Pros. Quest Pro, right?
Yeah.
They just came out. They actually finally don't look like just a piece of plastic, right? This looks like a legit, out of,
it looks like $1,500 worth of plastic.
Yeah, I mean, there's like all this glass around this, but we just tried this before the podcast here, and it's really impressive. The clarity, it's both AR, VR, right?
Yeah, they're passed through now. So there was always, you're deep in this, field. You essentially saw two technology approaches happening. You had the Magic Leap approach and the HoloLens approach, which was a pass-through device, which was more like PR glasses, and I have to figure out how to project
pass-through, meaning you're not like immersed in a VR. It's kind of on the world.
You can just see through like you're wearing a pair of sunglasses, right? The challenge with that is obviously you have to still project the image.
The challenge with that is we can't get Hatem to stop playing with it.
Yeah, exactly. He sought to project the images right? into your eyes that you're trying to augment the world with. So it's actually that's a really hard tech problem.
Yep.
And then the other approach was what Meta did with the Oculus or with the Quest, which was basically you're staring at screens. But you can use cameras to actually still see the real world. So you can still kind of simulate pass-through. So I'm not actually looking through the glass in this device with my own eyes.
So cameras are actually, got it, okay.
Yeah, I'm not looking, it's not your eyes that are seeing the world. It's actually high-resolution cameras.
Interesting, yeah. Because, your everything looks kind of digital.
A little bit, and again, that's all just, those are all just, tech, optics, and display problems.
I gotta say, it's much better than the regular Oculus that we tried last time when we did this.
Absolutely. I mean, this is much. I mean, as you said, the technology, right? And Magic Leap spent $2.6 billion so far. You said. I thought it was more than that, but you just said that. Facebook is spending $10 billion on the metaverse.
And half their workforce.
It's a lot.
It's
a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Would this be?
Listen, you can't take that lightly, right? I mean, from a product category spend perspective, I don't know there's ever been another category that's got as much investment as this.
Yeah.
So you think of the mobile phone. I mean, Apple didn't spend anywhere close
$3 billion basically on R&D. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you think even cars and other categories of manufactured homes, things like that. I mean, this you're talking about.
Well, I think what's different with this is that Facebook is saying, I know this is where the future is, and I'm going to spend all this money to get you there. Versus Apple, kind of you spend some, you create something, and you kind of iterate or just kind of evolve it and kind of build on it, right?
Yeah, the stakes are very different for each of them, though.
Correct.
I also think I think there's an inherent difference also with a company like Magic Leap versus a company like Facebook, Meta, whatever you want to call them, because Facebook is a public company with shareholders to answer to. Now, granted, Mark Zuckerberg has all the power in that company, but he's got to answer to these people about why $10 billion is, quote, getting flushed down the toilet because he wants to create some digital world versus Magic Leap is raising fund, and they have to answer funders, obviously, right?
Well, the investors are telling Facebook that they don't like this because the stock is down 70%.
But a lot of that is the public investment, right? So if I'm investing in Magic Leap, right? If Magic Leap comes to me today and they show me that, and I'm a big hedge fund or I'm a private investor who has $10 million to invest in this thing, I'm saying, okay, I know that this is a 10-year plan. This is not something that's going to happen next year. That's the difference with a public company.
Sure.
And Apple keeps their stuff very close to the chest, so they don't have to worry about that issue, right?
Yeah.
Zuckerberg came out guns blazing about how the metaverse was going to change the world, and now was going to be his characters don't even have legs. I honestly, the first time I put it on, I felt like I was playing Wii for the first time. When the Nintendo Wii with those like little whatever you want to call them, avatars.
I think the challenge with that vision, right, is he's projecting out to a future that has a lot of technology hurdles in front of it. And
Correct.
But when you're trying to like make such a big change in the direction of your company and how you're investing and like what your future looks like, you have to project out a bit further.
Sure.
Apple doesn't need to do that at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And so therefore they've got a different type of competitive advantage. You know? And each has its pros and cons. I mean, in one regard, it's a talent war because these are really hard people problems. Like we have to solve really challenging problems. So with what Meta did and how big they go, I mean, they do attract some really quality people to this particular category and problem, right?
Yeah.
And that may or may not be the deciding factor.
I also think it doesn't help that in the same time they're doing this, their core business is in secular decline.
Yeah.
Which makes it a lot harder. So Google has YouTube and Google Search, which generates all its revenue, and they could spend $1 billion on other bets because that business makes all their money.
Right.
If somehow you turned off 30% of Google's search, which is kind of what's happened to Facebook in the last year.
Yeah.
And all these other even now, they're actually, in the last Google call, they started talking about the other bets, ramping down some of these other bets because they're not profitable, obviously. They're losing money. Well, now you have a $10 billion loser in addition to a business that's in secular decline and a company that everybody hates simultaneously.
Ayal doesn't want to buy Facebook stock, it sounds like.
No. What I'm saying is that that's the challenge that Mark Zuckerberg has now that nobody else has. Because
Well, and I think the public opinion one at the end there, I mean, that's a really challenging one because like even if you just take the investment story around specifically kind of metaverse related technologies, like you're spending $10 billion. But that, once you look at the actual revenue growth curve, the adoption curve and stuff, there's actually some really interesting underlying numbers if you compare it towards the last time a major competing device was introduced.
Yeah.
Right?
iPhone.
Yeah, the iPhone.
Right.
I mean, they're 5 months behind from a dollar perspective in the store to $1.5 billion in revenue on apps.
So people don't know this. That's pretty interesting.
Like that's insane.
1.5 billion in revenue on the
apps.
On the apps.
For Oculus?
For Oculus.
For the Oculus.
Really?
Store. Yes.
That was brand new information.
Right.
If you would have asked me, I would have said 1.5 million.
Yeah. No,
If that.
They have several apps doing over
That's
100
crazy.
million in revenue.
So who's spending this money? Who is
I
it?
mean, they have tens of millions of devices out there now. I mean, the actual device sold better than the consoles this last year. So you think about that. The device is selling faster than PlayStation 5 or the new Xbox, which is like. I mean,
So is it mostly gaming then? Is it mostly gaming
That's
now?
where they started, and of course, because of starting so heavily on the consumer, you're going to get criticized really, really heavily from what the expectation is, and so. Obviously, we don't play in that sector. We play in the enterprise sector.
Yeah,
so
let's talk about the enterprise
Yeah.
sector because I think that's really interesting to me too because it really solves a lot of these skills gap and stuff.
There's huge problems that you can solve with this technology.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the skills gap. Let's talk about some of the issues that have arisen from work from home, right? Because as you say, the work from home thing, it's here to stay. In what version? I'm curious to see if we go into a recession. Do CEOs start to demand that people come back to the office more and more, a la Elon Musk?
Yeah.
And in an effort to boost productivity, because I always feel like, and I'm a social person, so I'm obviously inherently biased towards collaboration and being in person.
Yep.
But I feel like sometimes the stuff that happens, where creativity happens, where idea generation happens, is not in the meeting that you and I scheduled for next Tuesday at 3, is in Hatem and I walking to Starbucks to get coffee, and we start talking about something randomly, and boom, it hits.
Yeah.
So how do we use these tools to sort of
Well, it's a really good question, and Zoom is definitely not that.
Right.
And so
They just introduced calendars. I don't know if you saw that. It's very cutting edge stuff.
I mean, it's a bunch of constraints and structure around things that you need to be serendipitous.
Yeah.
Right. Which because creativity and that collaboration is about that serendipity of moments and ideas. Right. So putting more structure and more policies and constraints around to make it work more effectively it's not going to solve that problem.
Right.
So it's another interesting aspect of this the VR and AR technology is we're getting very close to being able to kind of recreate kind of a virtual office. So you could, instead of being in a Zoom call where we're in those 2D boxes, can't read each other's body language, there's no serendipity, there's no spatial sound. One of the things that's actually shockingly important about this category is actually spatial audio.
So listening to people from different places.
So if we were gonna let's say we were gonna do this podcast in VR, we could be sitting there. We could still be as if we're present, like we are. The spatial sound would still work. So if a sound came from across the room, it's going to take my attention. So those types of things are important for how we communicate with each other, and then we still get the benefits of kind of those the in-person collaborations, but without the coordination cost.
Yeah.
So not having to, because really what people are pushing back on is not being with each other. It's the price of being with each other.
Yeah.
Right. And if I have to spend hours of my life to be
commuting
with those people, and that pays off sometimes, it's not a good trade.
Right.
And that's the problem. Right. So you can change some of those things. And this technology, again, it's not quite there yet. And right now it's like, people are showing up as avatars, but there's technology out there already that we won't show up as avatars.
Yeah.
You'll show up just like you look.
Yeah.
And so that gets interesting because then you start this,
I think that's what you're saying right now is there is almost a lack of patience, right? People just want it to happen right away. And then if it doesn't happen, like, this doesn't work. You know?
Listen, I mean, when's the last time that we as a society got behind something that took like 10 years for it to develop?
Yeah. Right.
Like
we don't have
going
that
to the
patience.
moon, like what? Like
vehicles.
I mean, even the internet. Everybody hated on the internet for years
before.
For years.
Yeah.
It's like it's much more fun to hate on something than to actually think about what the time horizon is and decide if the value's there, right? Because at the end of the day,
And our attention spans are ever shorter these days, also, right? We were just talking about that, somebody sent me a 10-minute video about something interesting, and I'm like, I don't know, am I going to commit 10 minutes of my life? Seems like a long time.
This podcast is for 60 minutes, guys.
But it's so interesting that you're absolutely going to.
Let's not lose the room.
Let's lose it at a 1.5 speed. If you want.
Talk to me about what Talespin is building, like the use case scenarios for this, and how.
So going back to the idea of like anytime a new medium comes into play, you have to solve a whole bunch of challenging problems. And so first one is how do you get a huge volume of content to make the medium powerful?
Sure.
So you think like YouTube, if it's got 5 videos on it, nobody cares.
Right.
It's because at some point we solved the content problem. So we had the same problem in this medium. And so we built, first we built a no-code platform for people to actually be able to create in this medium that don't need development skills at all. And
so you don't have to be a software engineer to build stuff.
No, you don't have to know anything. You have to. You can never have ever had a 3D file on your computer and still use this software.
That's pretty amazing.
You don't need to know anything about any of that.
Okay.
And
so you had to create the tools for people to create.
Yeah.
You're like the Wix, the web developer for 3D VRs.
Yeah, like Webflow or Wix. I mean, and they build the tools. Then those tools turn into templates. Those templates turn, and you get this multiplying effect.
Yeah.
So we had to solve that problem first. We're like 2 years into that problem now, and that's doubling over really fast. There's also kind of like what does a learning platform look like when you think about scale? And so if you rewind back to like 2000, Cornerstone Demand, right, a Santa Monica based company, right? They became their first really prominent online learning platform. And what was driving that was a lot of compliance related, problems. So they wanted a better record of if you had taken certain training,
CEs, whatever,
And so that problem drove kind of online learning and built several really, really big companies. And now as we move into this next chapter, I mean, there's a whole bunch of those kinds of problems that are driving it, but it's not compliance. It's this other area of like, wow, we have a lot of big skills gaps. Like, and businesses don't have a real way to meaningfully affect the change that they need, especially if everybody's remote. So the other problem comes back into play, right? If I need to teach you systems thinking and some of the more collaborative critical thinking skills, those are the skills that you would go in person and you'd develop, right? You'd go into a workworkshop, you'd sit in the room and you'd have a mentor, you'd think through it. And so if those structures aren't in place anymore, and those are the most critical skills for your business, you got a real problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And so that's kind of where we're sitting is we, it's not compliance driving it this time. It's this more amorphous area of like, how do we achieve the personal development we need to make these companies successful?
And companies obviously are realizing this right now. And they're just, Tell me a little bit about some of the people companies that you're working with, and they're just.
So we're with 60 kind of going on 70 multinationals. So we work really globally. Because it's not a U.S. problem. It's a universal problem.
Right.
And so working, Accenture was really big in the news this last year. They rolled out 60,000 VR headsets to new employees. And so we worked with them on that rollout. And this year they went even further because it really, really worked. And so, they're kind of like one of the leading agents of change when it thinks about workforce transformation. Like they get hired a lot to deal with these kinds of problems.
Because that's what they do, right? They go in to help people figure out how to fix their problems,
they
right?
cut a problem to its core, and like all the big consulting firms do, and then they figure out how do we go about solving these things more systematically. And it's usually for, I got 10,000 people that I need to move from over here to over there. Yeah. Or I got this gigantic, gap around a new product I'm launching. So, these firms, like, they really lead the way. But we're working, across 16 different sectors. So it's in healthcare, it's in technology, it's in oil and gas, it's in utilities, it's in insurance, financial services.
We just used the Magic Leap thing, and it's like basically fire kind of, you go through a satellite thing, and there is a fire, you get
it's basically command and control.
And control system, right? This is not a game. Like if I'm trying to solve a real problem, like that's really helpful to me. We're
3D creatures.
Right.
We're 3D creatures working in a 2D world right now. If you think about it that way.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's like taking all the power we have up here and funneling it back through a little tiny interface.
Totally. And I think more people are on board with the AR thing than they are the VR thing. And I think, to our point earlier, if I can make the glasses look like the glasses you're wearing on your face right now, I don't think anybody would have a problem with that.
Well, I think the issue is the technology is hard, right?
And that's exactly the point. So, right, it's like the same thing. Like what I'm trying to think of the other technologies that have this issue now, and I can think of self-driving cars, right? Like the tech, so to speak, is like we're there.
Yeah, we're there.
But there's all these other ancillary issues, logistics, safety. Like I have full self-driving on the Tesla. I hate it. Every time I turn it on, I turn it off because I go, I would never drive like this ever. And it's a completely different experience, even though technically it's following all the rules that it's doing all the things.
It's probably a better driver than you are.
But it's not because it constantly like stops. It sees like a car like a mile ahead. It's like it stops.
It's so funny.
It's herky jerky. And
I just traveled to Tunisia, so I just came back from Tunisia and I rented a car there. Driving in Tunisia or anywhere in Africa is like driving in a video game. And I was laughing because full self-driving would never work. There is like, animals crossing the freeway and like, red lights don't exist. And like, it's just, go figure that.
So it's the same idea, right? It's just this, we have this real world problem that we have to, we have tech that's sort of there. We just have to really fit it in the right way.
Well, and I think that goes back to why when you go really broad with a product like that, and from a consumer launch perspective, you kind of overshoot the utility, right? Because there's it's like self-driving tractors versus self-driving cars.
Correct.
Right?
You're not going to hit anything.
Yeah, a self-driving tractor has utility today and probably doesn't have many problems that don't deliver on the actual maximum utility of that idea, right? So when it comes to like VR and AR, in the enterprise space, there's really meaningful utility where people are saving, tens of billions of dollars doing things differently. And that gets kind of somewhat lost in the narrative of when Meta goes full consumer, right? And Magic Leap did it first too. Magic Leap launched initially as a consumer device because they thought they could get to the form factor faster.
Yeah.
And really, went all in on that. And now they're more focused on the enterprise side because, people can do surgery in that thing, and it's game changing.
Right.
If you can essentially have that type of visualization on top of those types of use cases.
Yeah.
So
the value is just so much bigger.
Huge.
It's huge, right?
It's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, I think it's just a lot of technology that we're just going to need to be patient on.
Yeah.
Like it's coming.
What's Apple's role here? Like where do you see? Because that's, we know or we hear that they're working on something.
Yeah.
What do you think? You worked at Apple 20 years ago. You know.
I know.
You probably know what they're doing.
I know exactly how secretive they are. I had to sign all those agreements back in the day.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly.
It's intense. No, I think that they have a lot of advantages because and not just them. Like if you think of on the consumer side, set that aside. So on the enterprise side, there's infrastructure that's in place from players like Apple, like Lenovo, like HP, that they deliver devices into these enterprises in mass every year. So the idea of being able to just add some new device category is a lot easier for them than a new entrant.
So talk about that a little bit, because I know one of some of the things that you had an issue with is you could not deliver software to many devices at the same time. Like that's one of the problems, right?
Well, again, anytime there's this many new players, I mean, there's lack of standards. So to support, 6 devices from a platform perspective doesn't cost 6 times as much, but it's definitely not that efficient. It definitely costs you a multiple.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you have that much noise in an early ecosystem, it makes the whole growth of the ecosystem challenging.
Right.
And so when you get, somebody like, Apple who's learned that lesson, right? Because they launched the iPhone. I mean, we forget that the App Store didn't come until 3 years into the iPhone.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
So and they
iPhone 4, I think that's where the game changer, right?
Yeah. And they gave developers $100 million as a fund to go out and try to develop content to be able to be in that. And they curated that, So they took a very intentional set of steps, and some of the players that are earlier in the VR space, AR space, they're like following some of those steps, but you're still going to stumble, right? If you're doing it for the first time. So, Apple's, pretty solid in all those regards. So I think when they do decide to enter, I mean, it will be with that same level of intention, and specificity. So the rumor is they'll come into the device or they'll come into the market with a very high priced device. That will be intentional too.
Yeah.
Because they're going to send a signal that this is not a consumer device yet.
Right. They just
right. Which Oculus did the opposite, or Meta did the opposite. They said, this is a consumer device. It's $300, $400, and so those are the types of things that just set expectations and really set. They have a domino effect.
Right.
Big domino effect.
Awesome.
Do we know anything about Microsoft and like the HoloLens and how are they utilized? Because I hear about the HoloLens.
Yeah.
But I just don't actually hear.
It's also a $3,000 device.
Right. So that's why I ask
yeah.
on the enterprise side. Right. Is this being utilized? Are people how is it different?
I think it's so interesting because all these big companies, all these big tech companies, they all get kind of lumped together in terms of, I think, the way that we think about them. But Microsoft and its cognitive services and its Azure stack, its cloud services stack, similar to AWS, these are gigantic businesses, right? And the implications of those businesses, whether they participate in the device category or not, are there. So right now, Microsoft has a bunch of cognitive services and a bunch of spatial cloud services around this device category. So they don't even have to have a device if they don't want it. They're still going to see growth out of the category. And so it's right now you see
just as a data servers and whatever.
Yeah, and they're moving a lot of that infrastructure into Teams right now. So Accenture and Microsoft and Meta all announced a partnership. And Microsoft.
That was an interesting partnership between Meta and Microsoft. Huh?
Yeah. I mean, again, they understand. What I think to me what that showed is they understand the infrastructure required from a workforce transformations perspective, right? Accenture there is saying this is a change management play. We have a lot of things we have to explain to people. infrastructure. Microsoft is trusted around infrastructure,
Sure,
right? When it comes to cloud services, how data is processed, how it's stored, things like that. And then Meta, who's by far leading the device category right now.
Sure.
So, so I don't know. I mean, to me, that was like, oh wow, this is a moment where there's some real growing up going on here.
That's exactly
Right?
That's exactly what I thought.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome stuff, man. So you just raised a bunch of money. I don't know how comfortable you are talking about some of this stuff. I know you have some really, really awesome investors in your round, It's a really tough year, right?
Wild year.
Wild year for anybody in tech, I think one of the reasons we do these things, we want to talk about the future, right? Like these, despite the tough environment, there is growth, there is exciting things happening,
Yeah, it's challenging. So for us, right? Like we're basically now, because of the device maturity, because of the accepting nature of post COVID of people to think about these things differently and stuff like that. Like we're right in the middle of a several 100% year-over-year growth trajectory.
It's amazing,
right? And we're doing that amongst a backdrop which is just crap, right? So you rewind the clock 12 months and we had these same numbers and the same reality, the company's worth twice what it's worth right now, right?
Yeah.
And that's not even being overblown around the crazy valuations. That's just being like pragmatic to what the market was supporting, So what we're seeing now is that one, there's a real domino effect of those kind of like overvaluations and things like FTX and all that stuff is playing into the fallout of just uneasiness.
What a crazy story.
And then there's another shoe that is probably going to drop, which is that in a downturn there's going to be a lot of software savings. There's you go to like, where can I cut costs?
Yeah, enterprise, right?
Yeah. And do I let go of people? Well, people's like I got all this talent problem right now. That seems like a category I should really probably not create. I already got a big problem there. Even companies that are that are attractive to bring in new talent, they still have a real problem there. With the exception of those that kind of really bloated up, right? But most companies they got a talent problem. And then you look at things like can we push a product release? Can we cut software spend? Can we? So I think some of that stuff's going to still ripple back through the market.
Right.
But what we're hearing is that people are continuing to spend and expand their spend in the category we're in.
Yeah, and amazing, right?
Yeah.
Like, amazing to be in an environment that is so tough, yet you're in a category that is expanding, and people are realizing how important it's going to be. Right.
The tricky part is it's always time. Right?
Always timing, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that life?
We know we're right long. It's just a question of like, what's the timing?
Yeah.
But that's what they say a lot of times is, the better companies, that like the ones that really last are built in these times.
Yeah.
Are the times where
Many
things are the
examples of
hardest.
that, right?
Yeah, that's
From
they're
Google.
talking about that, although, maybe 2 weeks ago was a better time to bring this up, but the advent of sort of Bitcoin and crypto sort of spawn out of the financial crisis, although now we're seeing that they're really just, many of them are doing the same things that the financial crisis did, just in a digital version.
That's kind of crazy.
But, like Google spun out of the .com bubble era and all this kind of stuff is like...
PayPal, Stripe,
exactly.
Bunch of examples, right?
And so the cream of the crop, like pressure creates diamonds. Like that's the idea.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Obviously, this is the Founder Series. We always like to ask kind of questions about some of the lessons you've had. Anyway, this is not your first startup. This you're like 3 times founder, several exits under the belt. Like some of the lessons that you've seen. I know you're probably one of the most relentless people I've ever seen in my life, one of the most hardworking. But what else?
I picked a really hard problem with this one. So if you're not relentless and willing to go the distance, I mean, when we sat down and started Talespin, it was kind of like I had a mindset of like, it's 10 years before I find out if this even is going to work, which is a really hard thing to commit to, right?
Sure.
Like, there's not many things in life you go, okay, that's just what it's going to take. But it was a big enough problem and one that like seems systemic enough or like important enough to the overall system,
Right.
That it was worth that kind of gamble. I think that was probably pretty accurate. We're 7 years in, and it's still probably a little ways.
You just
out.
needed a pandemic. That's it.
Yeah. Well, It accelerated it, but it's still going to end up being 10 years. So I don't, it's like it could have been 20. But yeah, all that aside, I mean, I think you have to pick the idea of like Uber for this or Uber for that, those types of things that we're getting lots of money and I don't think providing as much kind of critical value.
Sure.
Those things are obviously don't necessarily probably have a place in this startup environment.
Sure. So what you're saying is basically companies that just been built on just cash, throwing so much cash.
Well, and I also think I don't know. It feels like a time for deep tech. It feels a time for like big problems. And that's where I think again, like pressure creates diamonds, right? So it's like if and some of these companies that we're seeing really stand kind of through the downturn and stuff and where their future looks. It's like it's in those spaces.
Yeah. I think Elon actually, back when he was more normal than currently, he used to say that he's like, well, we have some really big problems to tackle, climate change and all, electric vehicles and all these things. But every engineer out of college wants to go work at Facebook and create, an app or something like that.
Because it was like kind of it's insane. I mean, what was going on in some of the big tech companies and the compensation structures, and it's time that gets reset.
Yeah, they're overpaying, and we have a lot of clients at these companies. We know what these compensation structures are like.
It's wild. If you try to pencil that value out to the end consumer, end user, you go, wow, how does that compute?
And you compete for talent, right?
Yeah.
So how does the startup that's trying to solve this really awesome problem or big problem compete with a Google that's paying you $1 million for,
They got to drink the Kool-Aid, right? That's the only way, right?
Yeah, you have to care about the problem.
Yeah,
you really have to care about the problem. I mean, it's funny I think the people that make the biggest impact just in general aren't motivated by money.
Correct. Absolutely.
That's the reality of life, right?
It really is.
Money's a byproduct.
Correct.
And so when you have a company that you're building that's going after a big problem, you tend to attract those people. So I mean, for us, it's like we have a phenomenal group of people.
Yeah. Listen, I think that's in every business. Like for us, when we hire people, it's really about passion. Like we don't. I mean, people can make money eventually, but if they're not passionate about what they do, like it's just not going to work. You know.
Yeah. And hard work and passion is the only two consistent form factors.
And trust. That's the other thing.
Yeah. 100%.
Like if you can tie those three things around, regardless of what changes in the world, then you can weather it.
Yeah.
And that's where if you get the zeitgeist of those cultural elements in a business, man, the business is basically it's just impenetrable, right?
Amazing,
It's like throw anything at it. Good luck.
I mean, till this day, if you talk to somebody who works at Apple, for example, like they're still all in. Like it's Apple. I noticed that out of the big tech companies, still has the most sort of like
pride.
That zeitgeist, that pride. That do you know what we do? Like we're awesome. And I'm like, I mean, I have all your devices. I get it. But I feel like more than any of the other big tech firms, they still sort of drink that Kool-Aid within the company.
Well, and that permeated all the way down into retail.
Yeah.
I mean,
totally.
You have, normally retail doesn't have that level of buy-in from the employee base. It's a high churn environment. Totally. It's a problematic customer service is hard. And
you opened the first Apple retail store.
I was working at Apple when we opened the first one.
That's awesome.
We did the Grove.
The Grove.
And, I went to the hospital when
that was the first one.
Really?
I cut the top of my finger off opening the Grove.
That's amazing.
Had to go to the hospital.
Bled for apples.
Yeah, literally. Blood.
Blood, sweat, and tears right there. For real.
Awesome conversation, God. Really thank you for stopping by and talking to us. I mean, what you accomplished is really amazing, and I know you're trying to solve something that's huge, and I think hopefully you're there. You're almost there.
Yeah. So I think we're in all the right conversations, which I'll tell you. I mean, whether we solve it or we just happen to kind of contribute to the solution, in the end of the day, it's like the conversations that we get exposed to, both in terms of like the big problems and what's going on the solution side, is super fascinating. And it's just like that'll get you up in the morning.
That's awesome.
Regardless of all the problems. And
not one company's going to solve the problem.
Oh,
right?
no way.
It's going to be.
No way.
That's how you know it's a good problem. Everybody is in on it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Anything else?
No, I think that's good stuff. So we appreciate your time, Kyle. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.